All right, so today we're going to really do a deep dive into a topic that's making a lot of waves in academia, and that's those potential U.S. federal funding cuts and, what they could mean for PhD programs.
Right.
We're going to explore how these cuts might impact not just, universities, but also the industries that rely on, PhD-trained talent.
Yeah.
And our source material for this deep dive is some really insightful excerpts from a Korean news article.
Oh, interesting.
That really digs into what's happening at U.S. universities.
Always interesting to get that outside perspective, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it really highlights just how global the implications are for some of these funding decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really interesting.
So let's unpack this funding squeeze.
Right.
If you remember back during the Trump administration, there were all those proposed cuts to the NIH and NSF.
Right.
And that created a ton of uncertainty for researchers, right?
Yeah, and, the article points out that it wasn't just about the proposed cuts themselves.
Yeah.
The administration even tried to prevent the NIH from posting grant review notices in the Federal Register. It was almost like a backdoor way to block funding.
Wow. I hadn't realized it was that intricate.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
And that's where Kimberly Cooper's story, really hits home.
Right.
She's a developmental geneticist at UCSD.
Okay.
And she talks about, that very real struggle of having these 6 staff members that are relying on her for their paychecks.
Yeah.
While these promised funds are in limbo.
It's a tough situation for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, her situation really highlights how the funding landscape for graduate students is this really intricate web of faculty grants and training awards and fellowships.
It's a very different world from how graduate education used to be.
Yeah.
It used to be thought of as kind of a gentleman's opportunity for the independently wealthy.
Right.
And now it's really shifted to this paid apprenticeship model.
Right.
Which has been fantastic,
Yeah.
For opening doors for brilliant minds from all walks of life.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
Um,
And, a huge part of that shift was fueled by federal funding.
Right.
So that's why these potential cuts are just so worrying.
For sure.
So how are universities reacting to this whole, funding chaos?
It seems like they're having to scramble.
Yeah.
With scalebacks, hiring freezes,
Right.
even reduced admissions.
Yeah.
It's a real mixed bag of responses.
Yeah, it seems like everybody's trying to figure out what to do.
Exactly.
Stanford, for instance, they implemented a hiring freeze.
Yeah.
And they're worried not just about research funding, but also a potential tax on university endowments.
Right.
And those endowments often play a big role in supporting things like financial aid and faculty salaries.
They really do.
It's like a domino effect.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you have UCSD's biological science program, which had to make the tough call to cut 8 PhD positions.
Wow.
Due to the funding uncertainty, which directly impacts, their ability to nurture the next generation of scientists.
Yeah, that's a huge impact.
Yeah, and it's not just about those initial cuts either.
Right.
There's also concern about potential cuts to the NIGMS training grant at UCSD,
Right.
which supports 30 first and second year PhD students.
Huge. And just as a reminder for our listeners, NIGMS stands for the National Institute of General Medical Sciences.
Right.
It's one of the institutes within the NIH.
Gotcha.
So losing that funding would be a major blow.
Okay, so we've got NIGMS. Then there's also the IMSD program mentioned in the article.
Yes.
Baylor College of Medicine is facing uncertainty with that program, which supports students from underrepresented groups.
Yeah, and that's a big one.
So what exactly does IMSD do?
So IMSD stands for the Initiative for Maximizing Student Development.
Okay.
And it's a program funded by the NIH
Gotcha.
that provides research training and mentorship to students from backgrounds that are underrepresented in biomedical research. And with all the changes happening, the government DEI programs, the future of initiatives like IMSD is definitely up in the air.
So it seems like we're seeing potential cuts across the board, impacting both the quantity and diversity of, future researchers.
Absolutely.
And we're not even talking about the ripple effects beyond academia yet.
Right.
This is just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The impact of these funding cuts extends far beyond just university labs and classrooms.
Yeah.
It goes way beyond that. It's a big deal.
Let's talk about those ripple effects.
Okay.
What happens when you start cutting funding for PhD programs?
Right.
What are the wider consequences?
Yeah. So let's think about that. So let's think about the connection between academic research and, industries like pharmaceuticals and biotech.
Right.
they rely so heavily on those discoveries and innovations that are coming out of universities.
Yeah, it's not just about those scientific breakthroughs, right?
Right.
It's also about that highly skilled workforce that PhD programs produce.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're talking about people who are not only experts in their field, but they've got, top-notch project management, critical thinking, communication, and adaptability skills.
Yeah, those are some highly sought-after skills in any industry.
Absolutely.
So if you cut PhD funding, you're essentially drying up the talent pool for these industries.
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
Kimberly Cooper, the geneticist that we mentioned earlier, had a great quote about this.
Yeah.
She said, "If graduate education is no longer funded by the federal government, the biomedical industry pipeline is dry."
Yeah, that's a pretty stark warning.
It really is. And it makes you wonder, are universities adapting their programs to focus more on these transferable skills
Yeah.
to make their graduates more competitive in different sectors?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's something that universities are really grappling with right now. Some are starting to incorporate more, professional development and industry-focused training into their PhD programs.
Right.
But it's a balancing act because they also need to maintain, the rigor of scientific training.
It's like they're trying to hit a moving target.
It's exactly. The needs of the workforce are constantly evolving.
And it raises another important point. This isn't just about the impact on biomedicine.
Right.
Yeah, the skills PhDs develop are applicable across a wide range of fields.
Absolutely.
Think about tech finance, data science, even education.
Yeah, the list goes on and on.
So the potential consequences go way beyond just one sector.
It's true.
This could have a ripple effect throughout the entire economy.
Rachel Airy, a neuroscientist at Baylor, put it really well.
Oh, yeah.
She said, one of the most important things that we do is not just help make the discoveries of today, but by training the future scientific workforce, we're helping ensure that there can be discoveries tomorrow.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Really is.
It really highlights how crucial PhD programs are for, driving future innovation.
Absolutely.
But if we're seeing these hiring freezes and program cuts, what does that mean for the current crop of researchers?
Yeah, it's a big concern.
That brings us to the human cost of all this uncertainty, right?
Yeah. The article talks about how Cooper's mentee, a senior postdoc, is even considering overseas fellowships.
Wow.
Because of the lack of opportunities here in the U.S.
It's almost like we're pushing our best and brightest away.
Yeah, and that really raises the concern of a brain drain.
Right.
If talented researchers can't find opportunities here, they'll go elsewhere.
Right.
And that could have a long-term impact on the U.S.'s standing as a global leader in research and innovation.
So it's not just about funding cuts in the present.
Right.
It's about the potential loss of talent and innovation in the future.
For sure.
What happens to scientific progress when the next generation of researchers is discouraged or forced to seek opportunities elsewhere?
Yeah.
That's a pretty sobering thought.
It really is. And, it's not just about, losing prestige or anything like that. It's about losing the ability to solve, critical problems.
Right.
And to advance knowledge in ways that benefit humanity.
Yeah, and that's a really important point. And it's something that we need to be thinking about very carefully as we make decisions about how we fund research and education.
Absolutely. These decisions have far-reaching consequences, and it's important to consider those carefully.
So as we wrap up our deep dive,
All right.
I'm left with this feeling of, wow, the choices we make today about funding and supporting the next generation of thinkers have far-reaching consequences.
They really do.
It's not just about abstract concepts. It's about people's lives, the health of our economy, and the future of innovation.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has sparked some curiosity and maybe even a little bit of urgency.
Yeah, get out there and get involved.
Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep those conversations going. Until next time, stay curious.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the long-term consequences, right? Like, we're not just talking about budget cuts.
No.
We're talking about potentially hindering, our ability to address some of those huge global challenges like climate change or disease. Absolutely. And the article makes a really interesting point.
Okay.
Could this shift in funding lead to the U.S. losing its position as that global leader in research and innovation?
That's a big question.
Yeah, it is.
And honestly, a little unsettling.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder what happens to fields, beyond biomedicine if this trend continues.
Yeah.
Could we see similar impacts on engineering or the humanities or the arts?
It's certainly a possibility.
Yeah.
I think, that these funding decisions really send a message about what we value as a society.
Right.
And if we're not prioritizing research and education, it really raises questions about what kind of future we're building.
So let's bring this back to our listeners.
Okay.
What are the key takeaways here? Like, what should they be thinking about after this deep dive?
I think the most important thing to remember is that funding cuts to research and education aren't just about numbers on a balance sheet.
Right.
They have really real-world consequences. That can impact the economy, technological advancement, even our ability to address those big global challenges we talked about.
Yeah, it's like a chain reaction.
Right.
Starting with decisions made in Washington.
Yeah.
And ultimately affecting all of us.
Exactly. And it's so crucial for people to understand these connections and engage in those conversations about the value of investing in research and education.
Absolutely.
Because ultimately, those investments are investments in our future.
Well said. And I think, that's what I'm taking away from this conversation is that the future of research and innovation is something that we all have a stake in.
We really do.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with me today.
The pleasure was all mine.
It's been eye-opening, to say the least.
Always fascinating to explore these complex topics.
Right.
And try to, connect the dots.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has sparked some curiosity and maybe even a little bit of urgency.
Get out there and get involved.
Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep those conversations going. That's great. Until next time, stay curious.